My husband checked into a hotel with a young woman using my name, and my son helped him. But I found the receipt. And let me tell you, finding that flimsy piece of paper was like finding a live wire in a puddle. It shocked my entire world into a different, darker color. This is a story about the lies we think can contain us and the quiet, terrifying strength it takes to shatter them. If you're ready for a story of betrayal that cuts deeper than any affair and a resilience forged in the fires of utter heartbreak, then settle in and please consider subscribing. Your company on this difficult journey would mean the world to me. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 68 years old. This story, as impossible as it sometimes feels to claim it, belongs to my life. It is the truth of my last year, a year that began in the soft, comfortable haze of a long marriage and ended in the clarifying, brutal light of a truth I was never meant to see. It's about the day I learned that the man I shared a bed with for 42 years, the man who held my hand through childbirth and bankruptcy and the loss of our parents, was capable of an architect's precision in his deceit, and that our only child, the boy I carried and raised and loved with a ferocity that defied reason, had willingly handed him the blueprints. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were for laundry and light grocery shopping. They were for the gentle, monotonous rhythm of a life built and maintained. Robert, my husband, had left for work at his usual time, 7:15 a.m., pressing a dry kiss to my cheek, his briefcase in hand, the very picture of a reliable man. Our son, Jeremy, who lived in the apartment over our detached garage, had already left for his job at the architectural firm. The house was quiet, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the dust motes dancing in the slanted morning sun. I was stripping the bed, the scent of our shared sleep still on the sheets, when I decided to be a good wife. Robert had been wearing his favorite gray suit to a series of important client meetings, and I thought he might need it again before the week was out. He was notoriously forgetful about dropping things at the dry cleaners. His walk-in closet was a monument to a life of orderly success. Rows of crisply ironed shirts, suits arranged by season and shade, shoes polished to a high gleam. I was the curator of this museum of him. My hand brushed against the wool of his suit jacket, the one he'd worn the previous Thursday. I always checked the pockets. He had a habit of leaving crumpled receipts, clipboards, the occasional mint. My fingers closed around a small, folded square of paper in the inside breast pocket. Not the usual thermal-printed slip from a coffee shop. This was thicker, linen weave, hotel stationery. I unfolded it slowly, a faint floral perfume rising from the paper. It was a receipt from the Alexander, a boutique hotel downtown I'd always wanted to see. The kind of place with a jazz bar and 300 thread count sheets. The charge was for a single night, the previous Thursday, room 814. The name on the reservation was Vance, Eleanor. My blood went very still in my veins, a cold sludge. My name! But I was here that Thursday, watching a documentary on PBS and waiting for him to come home from his supposed late client dinner. My eyes, refusing to believe, dropped to the bottom of the receipt. There, itemized, was a charge for a romance package, a bottle of Dom Perignon in chocolate-covered strawberries, and then the final, elegant script that felt like a physical blow. Thank you for staying with us, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. The world did not tilt. It did not go black. It simply sharpened, every detail in that closet becoming a razor's edge. The grain of the wood on the hangers, the specific weave of the suit in my hands, the dust particle suspended in a sunbeam near the door. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. He had taken another woman to a luxury hotel, and he had used my name to do it. The audacity was a separate injury laid on top of the foundational crack of the infidelity itself. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was an erasure. He was rewriting our reality, casting some stranger in the role of me, in the role of his wife. in the bed that was supposed to be ours. A sound escaped me, a small, wounded thing like a stepped on bird. I stumbled out of the closet, the receipt clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. I made it to our bed, sitting heavily on the bare mattress, the scent of us now feeling like a suffocating lie. Why my name? The question screamed in the silence of my mind. Was it for points on his credit card? A perverse joke? A way to make his mistress feel more legitimate or perhaps more demeaned? The possibilities were all monstrous. I sat there for an hour, maybe two, the sun moving across the room, the receipt my only companion in a world that had suddenly become a hostile, unfamiliar country. When the front door opened and closed around 5, I was still there, perched on the edge of the bed, the receipt smoothed out on the duvet beside me. I heard Jeremy's cheerful call, "Mom, you home?" His footsteps came down the hall, familiar and comforting, a sound that had anchored me for 30 years. He appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face, so like his father's in the shape of the jaw, open and smiling. "Hey, you okay? You look pale." I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger at the receipt. He came closer, his brow furrowed in concern. He picked it up. I watched his face, my sweet boy's face, for the shock, the outrage, the immediate promise to stand with me, to protect me. I saw none of it. Instead, I saw a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in his eyes, a tightening at the corners of his mouth. It was the look of a man accessing a file, not the look of a son discovering a tragedy. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What is this? Where did you get this?" "His pocket," I whispered, my voice raspy from disuse. "The suit from Thursday. He used my name, Jeremy. He used my name to check in with some woman." Jeremy sat down next to me, the mattress dipping under his weight. He put an arm around me, but it felt stiff, performative. "Look, Mom, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this." "A reasonable explanation?" I pulled away to look at him, truly look at him. For my husband checking into a hotel with a romance package under my name? What explanation could possibly be reasonable? Maybe it was for a client, a business thing. You know how fancy these places are. Maybe he was trying to impress someone and it was just easier to use the household card with your name on it. The words came out too fast, too smooth, like a speech he'd rehearsed. A cold dread, colder than the initial shock, began to uncoil in my stomach. It wasn't just Robert. The thought was so terrifying I could barely form it. It wasn't just Robert. "Jeremy," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "look me in the eye and tell me you knew nothing about this." He couldn't. His gaze darted away, toward the window, toward the life we used to have. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he had since he was 10. "Mom, don't do this. Don't put me in the middle." And in that moment, I knew. The knowledge was an ice pick to the heart. "You knew." The words were flat, final. "You knew he was having an affair." "No, I didn't." "You're lying to me." I stood up, the movement jerky. "Your father is destroying our family. And you're standing there, lying to my face. How long? How long have you known?" The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was the sound of my world, my entire understanding of my family collapsing in on itself. Jeremy looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat, but not in shame. "Not yet." "A few months," he mumbled. The confirmation was a physical blow. I staggered back a step. "Months? And you said nothing? You watched me. You ate my food.
You let me worry about his stress levels, his health, and you knew he was with another woman? It's not that simple, Mom. He burst out, finally looking at me, his eyes pleading. He came to me. He was a mess. He said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just some stupid midlife crisis thing. He begged me not to tell you. He said it would destroy you.
And so you helped him? The pieces were clicking into a horrifying mosaic. This receipt from a Thursday. You drove your father to work that day. His car was in the shop. I remembered it clearly because I'd been annoyed he'd taken my sedan, leaving me with Jeremy's impractical sports car for my errands. You didn't just drive him to work, did you, Jeremy? You drove him there, to the Alexander. The color drained from his face. That was all the confirmation I needed. My son, my own son, the child I had nursed and taught to ride a bike and consoled after his first heartbreak, had been his father's chauffeur to infidelity. He had facilitated the betrayal. He had helped his father carry the luggage that held the champagne and strawberries meant for another woman, a woman he had allowed to use my name. The initial searing pain was being rapidly replaced by a cold, focused fury. It was a feeling I hadn't known I possessed, a tectonic shift in my soul. Robert's betrayal was one thing. It was a wound between a husband and a wife, as old as time. But Jeremy's, this was a violation of a sacred covenant. It was a poison in the very well of our family. Get out, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Mom, please. Get out of my house now. He looked at me, truly seeing the change in my eyes, and for the first time, he looked afraid of me. He stood and walked slowly out of the room. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall, the front door opening and closing with a soft, final click. I was alone, but I was not the same woman who had found that receipt. That woman was gone. Her trust, her complacency, her entire life shattered on the floor around her. The woman who stood in her place had nothing left to lose. And she was just beginning to understand the true depth of the deception, a deception my own son had helped to build, a fortress of lies where my home used to be. And I was now standing outside the walls, armed with nothing but a shattered heart and a will of iron, ready to tear it all down, brick by painful brick. The silence after Jeremy left was not empty, it was dense. A heavy, living thing that pressed in on me from all sides. I stood in the center of our bedroom, my kingdom of 42 years, and saw it for what it was, a beautifully constructed stage set. The silver-framed photographs of our smiling family on the dresser were props. The worn spot on the oriental rug where Robert paced while on business calls was a mark left by an actor. The entire house was a theater of the absurd, and I had been the only one who didn't know she was in a play. The receipt was still on the bed, a white scar on the bare mattress. I didn't cry. The tears felt like a luxury for a softer woman, a woman who still believed in the foundations of her life. That woman was gone. A cold, clinical clarity descended upon me. This was not a crime of passion, a messy, impulsive mistake. This was premeditated. This required planning. My name? He had looked some other woman in the eye, handed her a glass of champagne, and called her by my name. The violation was so profound it felt less like a wound and more like a metaphysical annihilation. And Jeremy, my breath hitched. Jeremy had been the stagehand, moving sets in the dark, ensuring the play went on without a hitch. He had looked at me, his own mother, day after day, and chosen to protect his father's filthy secret. The betrayal had two heads, and both had bitten deep. I needed to move. Grief was a luxury, anger a distraction I couldn't afford yet.
I was a general surveying a battlefield after a catastrophic ambush. My first move was intelligence. I picked up the receipt, handling it by the edges as if it were forensic evidence, and took it to Robert's home office, a room I rarely entered, a sanctuary of his that I had always respected. Now, that respect felt like naivete. I sat in his large leather chair, the one he'd said he needed for his bad back, and woke up his computer. It asked for a password. I never snooped. I never felt the need to. Now, the need was absolute. What would a man who uses his wife's name for an affair use as a password? I tried his birthday, his father's name. Nothing. I tried Jeremy's birthday. Nothing. My fingers hovered over the keys. With a bitterness that coated my tongue, I typed in the name of our old dog Baxter, who had died 5 years ago. The screen unlocked. Of course, I thought. Sentimentality for a dead dog, but treachery for a living wife. The desktop was neat, organized. My eyes scanned the folders. Taxes, client projects, personal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked on personal. It was full of subfolders. Golf, fishing, Jeremy's graduation, and then one simply named A. I opened it. Inside were scanned PDFs. My blood ran cold. It was a life insurance policy, a very, very large one, on me, taken out just 18 months ago. I was the sole insured. He was the sole beneficiary. The numbers on the page blurred, then sharpened with terrifying clarity. $1.5 million. I sat back, the leather chair creaking in the silence. An affair was one thing, a cruel, soul-crushing thing. But this was a different category of sin. This wasn't just about lust or a midlife crisis. This was about money. This was about my life being worth to him dead than alive. The pieces, once scattered and confusing, began to fly together, forming a picture so monstrous I could barely comprehend it. The hotel receipt wasn't just an affair. It was a piece of a larger, more terrifying puzzle. He was laying a paper trail. If I died, conveniently, unexpectedly, who would question a grieving husband who had so clearly been trying to rekindle romance, taking his wife to a luxury hotel? He had used my name to create an alibi for my own murder. The thought was so gothic, so horrifying, it should have felt insane. But in the quiet of that office with the digital proof on the screen, it felt like the only possible, terrible truth.
And Jeremy, where did he fit into this? Did he know about the policy? Was my son merely an accomplice to adultery, or was he something far, far worse? A wave of nausea washed over me. I had to get out of that house. I couldn't breathe the same air as these thoughts. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and printed a copy of the insurance policy. I folded it, my hands trembling, and slipped it into my purse alongside the hotel receipt. I needed to go somewhere he would never think to look for me. I needed to think. I drove aimlessly for a while, the familiar streets of my town looking like a painted backdrop. I ended up at the one place that had always been mine alone, the city botanical gardens. I walked the paths, the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers a stark contrast to the rot I felt inside. I found a secluded bench overlooking the koi pond and sat, my purse clutched to my chest like a shield. What was my next move? Confrontation was out of the question. That would tip my hand. I was dealing with a man who planned, who covered his tracks, a man who saw me as a liability to be managed or an asset to be cashed in. I had to become a strategist. I had to protect myself. But how does a 68-year-old woman with a joint bank account and a life built entirely around a man suddenly disappear? I couldn't, but I could make myself a less appealing target. I could make his plan fall apart. The first step was financial. I needed my own money, resources he couldn't touch. I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer, a shark, a pit bull, someone who specialized in ripping apart the lives of men like Robert. As I sat there, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. A woman from my book club, Sarah. Her divorce a decade ago had been legendary,
a bloody, drawn-out affair where she'd taken her CEO husband for every penny he had. She'd mentioned her lawyer once, a woman named Miriam Croft, with a reputation for being utterly ruthless. That was who I needed. Ruthlessness. It was a foreign language to me, but I was going to have to learn to speak it fluently and fast. I took out my phone, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I found Sarah's number. What would I even say? Hello, Sarah? My husband is probably planning to kill me for the insurance money. Can I have your lawyer's number? I couldn't. I had to be careful. Every word, every move from now on had to be calculated. I took a deep, shuddering breath and typed a message. Hi, Sarah. It's Eleanor Vance. I know this is out of the blue, but I find myself in need of some discreet legal counsel regarding financial matters. I remembered you speaking highly of your attorney years ago. I would be so grateful if you could share her contact information. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The reply came almost instantly. Eleanor, of course. So sorry you're going through something. Miriam Croft is a miracle worker. Her number is... I saved the number, my fingers icy cold. This was it, the first concrete step into the war my husband had started. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a potential victim building her case. The thought was so terrifying it was almost exhilarating. I looked at the koi in the pond, their bright, oblivious forms gliding through the water. They had no idea of the darkness watching from the shore. I knew exactly how they felt. But I was done being a fish in a pond. It was time to learn how to become the fisherman. The number from Miriam Croft burned a hole in my phone, a digital ember of my new, terrifying reality. I stared at it until the screen went dark, my reflection a pale, wide-eyed ghost in the black glass. I couldn't call from here. I couldn't call from home. Robert had the landline bill, and while I doubted he monitored my cell, the paranoia was now a necessary survival instinct. Every ordinary action was now fraught with peril. Where does a woman go to secretly plot the legal dismantling of her life? The public library. It was a place I frequented anyway, to volunteer for the literacy program. My presence there would raise no flags. I drove there, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, every red light feeling like a personal taunt. The world was just going about its Tuesday, and mine had ended. Inside, the familiar hush and smell of old paper was a small comfort. I found a secluded carrel in the reference section, surrounded by towering shelves of encyclopedias no one ever opened anymore. A perfect place for a clandestine war council. I dialed the number. It was answered on the second ring by a voice that was all business, crisp and devoid of warmth. Miriam Croft. Miss Croft, I began, my voice a reedy whisper. I cleared my throat, forcing strength into it. My name is Eleanor Vance. Sarah Peterson referred me. There was a brief pause, the soft click of a keyboard. Ah, yes, Sarah. What can I do for you, Mrs. Vance? How to even begin? The words stuck in my throat. Hotel, sun, insurance, murder. They sounded like the ravings of a madwoman. I took a steady-in breath. I believe my husband is planning my death for a life insurance policy. The silence on the other end was absolute, and for a terrifying moment I thought she'd hung up. Then the clicking resumed, faster now. Explain. Briefly. Her tone wasn't skeptical. It was focused, like a surgeon asking for a scalpel. I did. I kept my voice low, my body curled around the phone, the hotel receipt, my name, my son's complicity, finding the policy on her computer, the $1.5 million. I laid it all out in a flat, unemotional monotone, the facts like stones I was piling up to build a wall between me and the life I'd known. When I finished, there was another pause. Are you in a safe location? She asked, her voice dropping a fraction. Yes, for now. Good. Listen carefully. Do not go home. Do not confront your husband or your son. Do not access any joint accounts. Do not use your credit cards. He may have alerts set up. Where are you right now? The public library. Go to a hotel. Pay in cash if you can. A moderate one, nothing flashy. Do not check in under your own name. Use your maiden name if you must. I need you to gather every financial document you can think of. Bank statements, tax returns, investment portfolios, the deed to the house, everything. Do you have any assets solely in your name? An inheritance, a savings account from before the marriage? I thought, my mind racing. My mother's jewelry and a small IRA from a job I had before Jeremy was born. It's maybe $20,000. It's a start. We will use that to retain my services. My retainer is $10,000. Can you access that IRA without your husband's knowledge? I think so. The statements come to a P.O. box I still have. Good. Do it. First thing tomorrow. Then I need you to come to my office, 10 a.m. I'm emailing you the address now. A soft ping sounded on my phone. Mrs. Vance, you understand the gravity of this. You are not filing for divorce. You are initiating a defensive action. This will be ugly. Uglier than a life insurance policy? I asked, a sliver of my new hardened self showing through. A short, approving sound, almost a laugh came through the phone. Point taken. 10 a.m. Do not be followed. She hung up, just like that. I sat in the carrel, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone as if it were a lullaby. I had a general. I had a plan. The fear was still there, a constant cold hum in my veins, but beneath it was something else, a sense of agency. I was no longer just a victim waiting for the blow to fall.
I followed her instructions to the letter. I went to a chain hotel near the highway, the kind with thin walls and stained carpets. I used my maiden name, Eleanor Pritchett, and paid for 2 nights with the $300 in cash I kept in my emergency kitchen jar. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever been. It was mine. Alone, I finally let the tears come. They were not tears of self-pity, but of rage and grief for the woman I had been, the woman who trusted, who loved, who believed in the sanctity of shared history. I cried for her, because she was well and truly dead. The next morning, I put on the same clothes from the day before, the ghost of my old life clinging to the fabric. My first stop was the bank that held my IRA. I walked in, a respectable-looking older woman, and told the startled young manager I needed to liquidate the entire account immediately, citing a family emergency. There were papers to sign, warnings about penalties, but within an hour, a cashier's check for $18,750 was in my purse. I felt like a bank robber. I walked out, half expecting sirens, but the sun was still shining and no one looked twice. Miriam Croft's office was in a sleek, modern high-rise downtown, a world away from my suburban life. Her firm, Croft & Associates, occupied the entire top floor. The receptionist led me to a corner office with a breathtaking view of the city. Miriam herself was not what I expected. She was around my age, with a sharp, intelligent face, stylishly short silver hair, and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a beautifully cut navy blue suit. She stood and shook my hand, her grip firm and dry. "Eleanor, please sit." She gestured to a comfortable chair opposite her minimalist desk. "You got the check?" I wordlessly handed it to her. She didn't even look at it, simply placed it in a folder. "Good. Now let's get to work. We have 2 primary objectives. First, to ensure your physical and financial safety. Second, to gather incontrovertible evidence of your husband's intent, which will not only protect you, but will also be devastating in the ensuing divorce and potentially criminal proceedings." She laid out a plan with the precision of a military campaign. I was to open a new, untraceable burner phone to communicate with her. I was to act normally, but avoid being alone with Robert. I was to feign a stomach bug to explain my absence.
As I stood to leave, feeling both empowered and utterly exhausted, she looked at me, a flicker of something like respect in her eyes. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor. Most women in your situation don't find the strength until it's too late."
I nodded, unable to speak. I rode the elevator down, the plush silence a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stepped out into the bright lobby, the cashier's check gone, but a new, grim purpose in its place. I had my marching orders. I was going home, back into the lion's den, but I was no longer prey. I was a spy in my own house, a ghost about to haunt the people who had tried to erase her. I would play my part, the confused, ailing wife, all the while gathering the weapons I needed to destroy them both. The game was on, and for the first time, I understood the rules. The drive back to my own house felt like crossing a border into enemy territory. Every familiar landmark, the big oak on the corner, Mrs. Henderson's perfectly manicured rose bushes, the little free library at the end of the street, now seemed like a potential lookout post. I pulled into the driveway, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Robert's car was there. Of course it was. I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, practicing the lie in my head. Stomach bug. I was at the library, then I had to pull over. I slept in the car. I'm frail. I'm vulnerable. I am not a threat. I opened the door, and the smell of home, lemon polish, and the faint, lingering scent of Robert's cologne assaulted me. It smelled like a tomb. He emerged from the living room, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor, my God, where have you been? Jeremy said you were upset, and then you just vanished. I've been calling all night." He moved to hug me, and I instinctively flinched back, a movement I covered by clutching my stomach. "Don't," I gasped, putting on a performance worthy of an Oscar. "It's a stomach bug, a bad one. I was at the library and it hit me. I had to pull over. I couldn't make it home. I slept in the car down by the old quarry. I'm so sorry. My phone died." I let my shoulders slump, making myself look small and pathetic. The relief in his eyes was palpable, but it wasn't relief that I was safe. It was relief that my disappearance had a simple, benign explanation. His concern softened into condescending pity. "Oh, honey, why didn't you call? I would have come to get you. You shouldn't be sleeping in your car at your age." He guided me to the sofa as if I were an invalid, his touch making my skin crawl. "At your age." The words were a subtle reminder of my perceived fragility, a narrative he was clearly comfortable with. I leaned into it, letting him play the dutiful, concerned husband. "I'm just so tired, Robert. I need to lie down." I needed to get away from his scrutinizing gaze. I needed to be in my office, the one he never entered, to start Miriam's document hunt. Of course. Let me get you some tea." He bustled off to the kitchen, and I seized the moment. I slipped into my small office, the one tucked away next to the laundry room, and closed the door softly. My hands trembled as I opened the filing cabinet. Our life was in here, neatly categorized. Taxes, 2010 to 2023. Insurance, home, auto. Life. My breath hitched. I flipped through the life section. There were two policies. One, a joint policy we'd had for decades, and another newer, just for me, the one I'd seen on his computer. I didn't take it. I just noted the policy number and the issuing company, scribbling it on a scrap of paper I tucked into my sleeve. I heard his footsteps and quickly shut the drawer, sliding into my desk chair just as he knocked and entered with a cup of tea. "Here you are, dear." His eyes scanned the room, a casual sweep that felt anything but casual. "Feeling up to a little tea?" I took the cup, my smile feeling like a crack in porcelain. "Thank you, Robert. You're too good to me." The lie was bitter on my tongue. He smiled back, A perfect, practiced smile. And in that moment, I saw the monster stranger hiding behind my husband's familiar face. He had looked at this policy, signed these papers, and calculated the value of my death. The man I had loved was gone, if he had ever existed at all. The game was far more dangerous than I had imagined, and the first move had just been made, not by me, but by the cold, hard proof in my own filing cabinet.
The next 2 days were a masterclass in duplicity. I moved through my own home like a ghost, playing my part to perfection. I picked at my food, complained of lingering nausea, and spent hours resting in my room, which gave me the freedom to scour our financial records on my laptop when Robert was at work. I found the P.O. Box statements for my IRA, confirming what I already knew. I located the deed to the house, both our names etched together on a document that now felt like a shared death sentence. I made lists, took photos with the burner phone Miriam had given me, and hid everything in a cloud folder she had set up, a digital vault my husband knew nothing about. But Jeremy was the loose thread, the unpredictable variable. He had tried to call my cell twice, and both times I let it go to voicemail. His messages were strained, full of a guilt that sounded more like panic. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Dad says you're sick, but just call me back." He was scared. Good. Let him be scared. Let him sit in the silence and wonder what I knew, what I was planning. Miriam's words echoed in my mind. He's the emotional weak link. The wedge had to be driven, and the opportunity came on the third day. Robert had left for a golf game, a Saturday tradition he hadn't broken in 20 years. The hypocrisy of it was staggering. He was out enjoying the sunshine while I was supposedly convalescing from the illness that had conveniently explained my discovery of his treachery. I saw Jeremy emerge from the garage apartment and head toward his car. This was my chance. I stepped out onto the front porch, wrapping my robe around me. "Jeremy." My voice was quiet, but it stopped him in his tracks. He turned, his face a complicated map of apprehension and hope. "Mom, you're up. Are you feeling better?" "We need to talk," I said, not answering his question. I didn't invite him in. I remained on the porch, forcing him to stand on the steps below me, a subtle power dynamic I'd learned from a lifetime of watching Robert. "I want you to explain it to me. Look me in the eye and tell me why you helped your father cheat on me." He shuffled his feet, his gaze dropping to the welcome mat. "Mom, I told you, he was a mess. He said it was a one-time thing, a mistake. He begged you not to tell me. He said it would kill you." "A mistake?" I let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Using my name at the hotel, Jeremy? That's not a mistake. That's a plan. And since when does your father share the sordid details of his mistakes with you?" I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "What did he promise you? Money? A down payment on a condo? A partnership in his firm? What was the price for your mother's dignity?" His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and genuine hurt. "It wasn't like that. How can you even think that?" "Then what was it like?" I pressed, my heart hammering. This was the crucial moment. I had to crack him open. Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like you and your father are partners in something far uglier than an affair. He was breathing heavily now, his fists clenched. "You don't understand the pressure he's under, the business, his age. He's scared, Mom. He's terrified of becoming irrelevant." The deflection was so transparent, so pathetic, it fueled my fury. "Don't you dare defend him to me. You drove him there. You dropped him off and you picked him up, didn't you? You saw that woman. What was she like, Jeremy? Young? Pretty? Did you wish she was your mother?" "That's enough," he shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry red. The carefully constructed dam broke. You want to know what it was like? It was humiliating. He was like a teenager, giddy and pathetic. And yes, I saw her.
She couldn't have been more than 30. And when I picked him up, he smelled like her perfume and cheap hotel soap, and he slapped me on the back like we were frat brothers. It made me sick. But he's my dad. The raw confession hung in the air between us, ugly and real. I had my recording, the burner phone in my robe pocket silently preserving every damning word. But his next sentence froze the blood in my veins.
He said it was the only way. He said he was in too deep, that he'd made some bad investments, and that this was the only way to fix it. He said everything would be okay once. He stopped, his eyes widening in horror as he realized what he was about to say. Once what, Jeremy? My voice was barely a breath. The world had narrowed to this porch, to my son's terrified face. Once what? He took a step back, shaking his head, a trapped animal looking for an escape. Nothing. It was nothing. He was just talking crazy. But I knew. The life insurance policy, the bad investments, the pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Robert wasn't just having an affair. He was financially desperate, and I was his retirement plan, $1.5 million retirement plan. Jeremy turned and almost ran to his car, peeling out of the driveway without a backward glance. I stood on the porch, the morning sun warm on my skin, but I had never felt so cold. I had driven the wedge. I had the recording. But the truth it revealed was far more terrifying than I had allowed myself to imagine. My husband wasn't just a cheat. He was a drowning man, and he had decided to hold me under to save himself. And my son, my beautiful boy, had known it. He had known, and he had handed his father the weights. The war was no longer about saving my marriage or my pride. It was about surviving a conspiracy that lived under my own roof. The silence after Jeremy's car screeched away was more profound than any sound. I stood rooted to the porch, the weight of his confession pressing down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. He said it was the only way to fix it. Fix what? The bad investments? And the unspoken end to that sentence, once I was dead. The thought was no longer a paranoid fantasy. It was a conclusion written in the cold, hard ink of financial ruin and a son's coerced complicity. I had wanted to drive a wedge, and I had succeeded in splitting open a fissure that revealed a chasm of darkness beneath. I went back inside, my body moving on autopilot. The burner phone felt like a lead weight in my pocket. I had to get the recording to Miriam. But first, I had to act normal. Robert would be home from his game soon, flush with fake camaraderie and lies. I went to the kitchen and started making his favorite meatloaf, the mundane ritual a bizarre counterpoint to the tectonic shift in my reality. The scent of frying onions usually comforted me. Now it just made me nauseous. I was setting a trap with comfort food. He came home just as I was sliding the pan into the oven. "Smells good in here," he boomed, his voice too loud, too cheerful. He came up behind me, putting his hands on my waist. I forced myself not to stiffen, to lean back into the familiar touch that now felt like the grip of a jailer. "Feeling better, I see." "A little," I murmured, turning to face him with a weak smile. "I thought you might be hungry after your game." His eyes scanned my face, searching for any crack in the facade. I kept my expression soft, slightly weary. The performance was everything. "You're too good to me, Ellie." He kissed my forehead, and his lips felt like a brand. Ellie. He hadn't called me that in years. It was a term from a more tender time, now weaponized to lull me into a false sense of security. Every endearment was a calculation. "I saw Jeremy earlier," I said casually, turning back to the sink to wash my hands. "He seemed upset?" A beat of silence. I could feel his attention sharpen behind me. "Oh, what about?" "I'm not sure. He was just rambling. Something about you being under pressure? Bad investments?" He was very agitated.
I told him he was being dramatic and to let you handle your own business. I turned, drying my hands on a towel, and met his gaze. I hope everything is all right, Robert. You would tell me if we were in some kind of trouble, wouldn't you? The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. I saw it, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes before the calm, patronizing expression slammed back into place. It was there and gone so fast I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. Jeremy worries too much, he said, his voice a carefully controlled drone. I made a few risky moves in the market, that's all. It's nothing I can't handle. Nothing for you to trouble your pretty head about. Pretty head. The condescension was a shield. He was scrambling. I had just thrown a grenade into his neatly ordered lie, and he was trying to assess the damage. He didn't know how much Jeremy had told me. He didn't know if his son, his partner in this horrific secret, was now a liability. Of course, I said softly, looking down at my hands as if soothed by his dismissal. I told him as much. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in tension disguised as domestic bliss. We ate the meatloaf. We made stilted conversation about his golf game, about a neighbor's new roof. Every bite of food I swallowed felt like ash. Every smile I gave him felt like a betrayal of myself. But I was playing a deeper game now. I was the spider, not the fly. I was letting him think he was still in control, all the while knowing the web was about to tremble with the force of the truth I now held. As soon as he fell asleep that night, his breathing deep and regular, I slipped out of bed. In the absolute darkness of the hall, I took the burner phone from its hiding place in the linen closet and connected to the cloud folder Miriam had set up. I uploaded the audio file of Jeremy's confession, my fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. I then typed a brief, stark message. He confessed. Robert has significant financial trouble. Jeremy implied my death was the only way to fix it. The pressure is working. The response came not as a message, but as a scheduled notification that appeared on the screen instantly, as if she'd been waiting. Meeting, tomorrow, 2 p.m., the same hotel you stayed at, room 312. Use the service elevator. Do not be seen. I deleted the notification, my heart thumping a wild rhythm against my ribs. The same kind of hotel. The irony was a sharp, painful knot in my chest. I was being forced to skulk through the shadows of the very institutions my husband had used to betray me. I crept back to bed, sliding in beside the man who dreamed of my death. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of his breathing, and I planned my escape from the life we had built, a life that had become my prison and his intended tomb. The next day, I told Robert I was going to a matinee with a friend from my gardening club, a cover story I had established weeks in advance for just such an occasion. He barely looked up from his newspaper, a grunt of acknowledgement his only reply. My invisibility was my greatest weapon. I drove to the hotel, my senses on high alert, checking my mirrors obsessively for any sign I was being followed. The paranoia was a living thing in the car with me. I parked in a different lot and entered through a side door, finding the service elevator as instructed. The hum of it felt like a countdown. Room 312 was at the end of a long, silent corridor. I knocked softly. Miriam opened the door, her silver hair impeccable, her expression grim. She ushered me in. The room was a mirror image of the one I'd stayed in, a bland, anonymous box that felt like a bunker. She said, "Play it," without preamble. I took out the burner phone and played the recording. Jeremy's voice, strained and angry, filled the small room. He said it was the only way. He said he was in too deep, that he'd made some bad investments, and that this was the only way to fix it. He said everything would be okay once... My voice, cold and relentless. Once what, Jeremy? Then his horrified backtracking. Miriam didn't react. She simply listened, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall, processing every syllable. When it ended, she let out a long, slow breath. "This is good, Eleanor. This is very good. It establishes motive and his knowledge of it. The once is the linchpin. A jury would connect it to the insurance policy." "A jury?" The word with a physical shock. "This has moved beyond a simple divorce," she said, her gaze finally meeting mine. It was steady, unflinching. "We are now building a case for attempted conspiracy to commit murder, or at the very least, a restraining order and a civil suit so devastating it will feel like a criminal conviction." She opened a leather portfolio on the cheap desk. "I've had a forensic accountant look at the information you provided. Your husband is not just in trouble, Eleanor. He's bankrupt. He's been liquidating his retirement accounts in secret, taking out massive, high-interest loans against his business. He's over $2 million in debt." The number hung in the air, suffocating. $2 million? The insurance policy was his Hail Mary. It was the only way out. "He's desperate," Miriam continued, "and desperate men are dangerous. We can't wait any longer. We need to get you out. Permanently." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It was a petition for a domestic violence protective order. "Based on the financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, and the credible threat to your life evidenced by the policy and this recording, I believe we can get an emergency order. It will force him out of the house. It will freeze all assets. It will give you breathing room."
I stared at the document. A protective order. It would make everything public. It would be the nuclear option. There would be no going back. The quiet, dignified wife would be gone, replaced by a headline: "Wife accuses prominent husband of plotting her death." "Are you ready?" Miriam asked, her voice softer now. I looked from her face to the paper, then back again. I thought of Robert's panicked eyes when I mentioned the investments. I thought of Jeremy's tortured confession. I thought of the hotel receipt with my name on it. The last vestiges of doubt, of sentimental attachment, shriveled and died. I had spent a lifetime being quiet, being good, being the supportive wife. That woman was a ghost. I picked up the pen she offered. It felt heavy, significant. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong in the sterile hotel room. "I'm ready." And I signed my name on the line, the ink a declaration of war that would finally, after a lifetime of silence, give me back my voice. The first shot was about to be fired, not in the shadows, but in a court of law, and I was no longer afraid of the sound. The pen felt like a scalpel in my hand, severing the last frayed cord tethering me to my old life. As I signed Eleanor Vance on the petition, a terrifying calm settled over me. This was no longer about suspicion or hidden evidence. This was a legal declaration that my husband was a threat to my existence. Miriam took the document, placed it carefully in her briefcase, and the click of the latches sounded like a cell door slamming shut. "The judge will see us in his chambers at 4 o'clock, she said. "He's a friend. He'll understand the sensitivity. Go home. Act normal. I will text this number when it's done. He will be served at his office first thing tomorrow morning." At his office? The words escaped me in a whisper. The public humiliation of it was staggering. "It's strategic," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It isolates him from his home turf, surrounded by colleagues. It maximizes his shock and minimizes his ability to react violently. He will be ordered to vacate the marital residence immediately and to have no contact with you. Do you understand? From the moment he is served, you do not answer the door if he comes. You do not answer his calls.
I nodded, my throat tight. The plan was in motion now, a boulder pushed from a cliff, and I was standing directly in its path. The drive home was a blur. I walked back into my house, the scene of the crime that hadn't yet happened, and the air felt different. It was charged, waiting. Robert was in his study, on the phone. I heard his laugh, a rich, confident sound that had once been the soundtrack of my happiness. Now it was the sound of the enemy, comfortable and secure in his fortress of lies. I went to the garden, my hands trembling as I deadheaded the roses. Each snap of a withered bloom felt like a small, satisfying act of defiance. I was tending to something that was still alive, still capable of beauty. Unlike the rotten core of my marriage, I waited. The afternoon stretched taut and silent. The burner phone in my pocket was a silent, sleeping beast. At 4:37 p.m., it vibrated once. A single word from Miriam. Granted. That was all. A world ended in a single word. The emergency protective order was in place. The law was now on my side. A strange, hollow feeling bloomed in my chest. There was no triumph, only a vast, echoing emptiness. I had just orchestrated the legal eviction of the man I had shared my life with for nearly half a century. I had labeled him a predator, and I had done it to survive. The rest of the evening was a study in surreal normalcy. We ate dinner. I think it was chicken. I have no memory of the taste. Robert talked about a new client. I nodded and made the appropriate noises. All I could think was, this is the last meal. This is the last time you will sit at this table as my husband. Tomorrow you will be a legal stranger, a threat to be managed. He went to bed, and I followed, lying beside him in the dark, counting the seconds until the dawn that would bring the reckoning. The next morning, he left for work at 7:15 a.m. as always. He kissed my cheek. Have a good day, Ellie. I didn't flinch. I just watched him go, memorizing the back of his head, the set of his shoulders, and the casual way he tossed his briefcase into the passenger seat. I stood at the window until his car disappeared from view. Then I began to prepare. Miriam had been clear. Once he is served, he may try to come home. He may try to access financial accounts. You need to be ready. I moved through the house, a ghost preparing for an exorcism. I packed a bag for him, a few suits, shirts, toiletries. I didn't want him having an excuse to come inside, to argue, to manipulate. I placed it neatly by the front door, a cruel parody of wifely duty. Then I changed the code on the garage door and the front door lock. My hands were steady. This was no longer my home. It was my stronghold.
The burner phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Mom, it's Jeremy. Dad just called me. He's freaking out. What's going on? They served him with something at work. A restraining order? What did you do? I didn't reply. Let him simmer. Let him feel the same helpless, frantic confusion I had felt standing in that closet with the hotel receipt. This was the wedge, being driven deeper with every passing second. His father was isolated, and I was silent. Then, at 10 a.m., I heard the roar of a car engine, the violent screech of tires on asphalt. I moved to the window, keeping to the side, hidden by the curtain. Robert's BMW was slammed to a halt at a crooked angle in the driveway. He exploded from the driver's seat, his face a contorted mask of pure, undiluted rage. He was still in his suit, but his tie was askew, his hair disheveled. He stormed toward the front door, his keys jangling in his hand. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He shoved the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed. The door didn't budge. The new code held. He tried again, more violently this time, jiggling the handle. Confusion flashed across his rage, followed by a dawning, terrifying comprehension. He was locked out of his own house by me. He stumbled back a step, looking up at the house as if seeing it for the first time. Then he saw the bag, his packed bag, sitting neatly on the porch like discarded trash. That was the final insult. A guttural roar of fury tore from his throat, a sound I had never heard from him, a sound of absolute animalistic loss of control. He kicked the bag, sending it tumbling down the porch steps, clothes scattering across the manicured lawn. "Eleanor!" he screamed, his voice cracking with the strain. He pounded on the front door with his fists, the heavy oak door shuddering under the assault. "Open this goddamn door! You can't do this to me!" I stood frozen on the other side of the wood, separated from his fury by a few inches of solid oak and the full force of the law. I didn't make a sound. I just watched through the peephole, a tiny, distorted fisheye view of my husband's ruin. This was the man I had loved. This was the monster he had become. And I was the one who had finally, after 42 years, locked him out. The first battle was over. I had won. But as I listened to his screams turn into ragged, broken sobs on my front porch, I knew with a chilling certainty that the war had only just begun, and the man on the other side of the door had just lost everything. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth.
The silence after his car finally sped away was heavier than the pounding and the screams. It was a thick, suffocating blanket woven from the threads of his rage and my own shock. I slid down the wall beside the front door, my legs giving way, the solid oak at my back the only thing keeping me upright. My whole body trembled, not with fear, but with the aftershock of a seismic event. I had done it. I had looked the devil in the eye and not blinked. Through the peephole, I saw the scattered contents of his suitcase. A silk tie draped over a boxwood hedge, a white dress shirt trampled into the grass, a single black shoe lying on its side. It was a perfect metaphor for our life. His carefully constructed order, violently undone and left in a humiliating mess for all the neighbors to see. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat on the cool hardwood floor, listening to the frantic beat of my own heart. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. It was Miriam. Status? I typed back with numb fingers. He came. He's gone. For now. Her reply was instantaneous. Good. Do not open the door for anyone. I've alerted private security. A car will patrol the street periodically. Change is underway. Change. Such a small word for the cataclysm that had just occurred. I pushed myself up, my joints protesting. I had to move. I couldn't sit here in the debris field of his anger. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, my hand shaking so badly the china cup rattled in its saucer. The ordinary act felt like a rebellion. I was in my house, drinking my tea, and he was locked out. The simple power of that thought began to steady my nerves. An hour later, a black sedan pulled up. A man in a dark suit got out, gave me a brief professional nod through the window, and began to methodically gather Robert's scattered belongings from the lawn. He placed them neatly back into the suitcase, set it beside the front door, and left without a word. It was clean, efficient, and utterly chilling. Miriam's doing. She was managing the fallout, containing the scandal, even as she orchestrated the war. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended animation. The house was profoundly silent, every creak and groan a potential threat. I jumped when the refrigerator kicked on. I watched from windows, my eyes constantly scanning the street. He would be back. This wasn't over. A man like Robert didn't just accept defeat. He would be regrouping, plotting his next move from some sterile hotel room just as I had. The symmetry was not lost on me. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, I saw Jeremy's car slow at the end of the street. It didn't turn into the driveway. It just crept past,
his face a pale, anxious moon in the driver's side window, staring at the house, at the normalcy of it that was the greatest lie of all. He didn't stop. He kept going. He was a reconnaissance mission, sent by his father or driven by his own guilt. I felt a pang of something, perhaps pity, for the boy trapped in the middle of this, but the feeling was quickly smothered by the memory of his voice on the recording. He said it was the only way. The night was the longest of my life. I didn't even try to sleep in our bed. I dragged a blanket and pillow to the small sitting room upstairs, the one with a lock on the door and a view of the driveway. I sat in the dark, the burner phone in my lap, and I waited. The security car made its rounds every 2 hours, its headlights sweeping across the walls like a lighthouse beam in my personal sea of fear. It was just after 3 a.m. when I saw it. A figure, silhouetted by the distant glow of a streetlight, cutting through the Hendersons' yard next door. He moved with a furtive, predatory grace I recognized instantly. Robert. He wasn't approaching the front door. He was heading for the back of the house, toward the patio. My breath caught in my throat. What was he doing? The protective order explicitly barred him from the property. Was he coming to break a window? To confront me? I crept to the window overlooking the backyard, my heart hammering. He wasn't looking at the house. He was standing by the old oak tree, the one with the gnarled, low-hanging branch. In the faint light, I saw him drop to his knees. He began digging at the base of the tree with his bare hands, frantically clawing at the earth. The sight was so bizarre, so primal, it took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. He wasn't here for me. He was here for something he had buried. After a few minutes, he stopped digging and pulled a small metal box from the hole, a lockbox. He wiped the dirt from it, clutched it to his chest, and stood up. He cast one long, hateful look at the dark windows of the house, then melted back into the shadows the way he had come. I stood at the window, frozen, long after he was gone. What was in that box? More money? Another secret phone? Evidence he needed to destroy? The existence of that buried box was a fresh betrayal. It was a symbol of a secret life running parallel to our own, a life so dark its artifacts had to be interred in the earth like something dead. I had won the first legal skirmish, but he was still fighting from the shadows, armed with secrets I hadn't even known to look for. The game had just changed again, and the stakes, impossibly, had gotten higher. The image of Robert on his knees, digging like a grave robber in our own backyard, was seared onto the back of my eyelids. I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair, the blanket pulled tight around my shoulders, and stared into the darkness, replaying the scene. The frantic digging, the triumphant retrieval of the box, the proprietary way he'd clutched it to his chest. That box contained something he needed too badly to risk leaving it, even with a restraining order in place. It was the key to something, and I had to know what. At first light, I called Miriam on the burner phone. Her voice was alert, despite the hour. I told her what I'd seen, my words tumbling out in a rushed, hushed whisper. "A lockbox," she repeated, her tone sharp with interest. "Buried. He came back for it the first night. That means it's critical. It could be cash, bearer bonds, a second passport, or it could be something that implicates him further. We need to know." "The ground is soft there," I said, a reckless plan forming in my mind. From the sprinklers, I could dig. I could see if he left anything behind, or if I can tell how long it was buried. "Eleanor, no," she said, her voice firm. "That's too great a risk. If he's watching the house, he could see you. We'll find another way." But I was already moving, the cordless receiver for the landline tucked between my shoulder and ear. I had re-plugged it in, a calculated risk. He won't be watching. He thinks he's safe. He got what he came for. He'll be wherever he's holed up, looking at whatever is in that box. This is my only chance. I was already pulling on a pair of gardening gloves from the mudroom. "I'll be quick." "Eleanor, I strongly advise against this." Her voice was tight with disapproval. "Noted," I said, and I hung up.
I was done solely taking advice. I was a participant in this war now, not just a client. I slipped out the back door, the morning air cool and damp on my skin. The grass was silvered with dew. I moved to the oak tree, my eyes scanning the neighboring houses. All quiet. The security patrol had passed 20 minutes ago. I knelt in the exact spot I had seen him, the earth still disturbed, a dark scar in the green lawn. I started digging with my gloved hands, the moist, cool soil giving way easily. I didn't know what I was looking for. A scrap of paper, another key. I dug deeper, my fingers scraping against a small, hard object. My breath hitched. I carefully brushed the soil away. It wasn't a key. It was a USB drive, a small black waterproof model caked in dirt. He must have dropped it in his frantic haste. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. This was the prize. I snatched it up, closed my fist around it, and quickly pushed the soil back into the hole, patting it down to look as undisturbed as possible. I was back inside the house in less than a minute, my heart thundering, the USB drive clutched in my trembling hand. I locked the door behind me, leaning against it, breathless. I had done it. I had stolen a piece of his secret. I didn't have a computer he hadn't touched. I couldn't risk using my own. The library. It had to be the library again. I showered, the hot water doing little to wash away the chill of the dawn and the thrill of the hunt. I dressed and drove to the library as it opened, the USB drive a burning secret in my pocket. I went to the same secluded corral, fired up the computer, and plugged in the drive. It asked for a password. Of course it did. I stared at the prompt, a wall between me and the truth. What password would a man like Robert use? Not our anniversary, not Jeremy's birthday. I thought of the computer password. Baxter, our dead dog. With a sense of grim inevitability, I typed it in. The drive unlocked. It contained 2 folders. One was labeled Legacy. The other was simply E.
My hand hovered over the mouse. E. For Eleanor? With a sense of dread, I opened it. Inside were dozens of scanned documents. My signature on forms I had never seen. Power of attorney documents, loan applications, real estate deeds. He had been forging my signature for years by the look of the file dates. This was how he'd gotten the loans, the lines of credit. He hadn't just planned my death. He had been actively plundering my identity while I was still alive. The scale of the betrayal was so vast it felt numbing. Then I opened the legacy folder. It contained a single video file. I clicked play. The video was shaky, taken on a phone. It showed a woman. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with dark hair and a familiar, achingly familiar smile. She was sitting in a sunny cafe, laughing at something off camera. The camera zoomed in on her face, and my blood ran cold. It was the woman from the hotel. It was the woman my husband had called Eleanor. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. It was her eyes. They were Robert's eyes. They were the same shade of hazel, the same shape. They were my son's eyes. And then the camera panned down, lingering on her left hand, which rested on a noticeably pregnant belly. The world dropped out from under me. The air left the room. I was staring at the screen, but I couldn't process what I was seeing. This woman, this girl, she wasn't just his mistress. The resemblance was unmistakable. She was his daughter. His daughter, which meant the child she was carrying was his grandchild. The video ended. I sat in the silent library carrel, the hum of the computer fan, the only sound. The pieces, the terrible, unthinkable pieces, finally crashed together. The hotel. My name. It wasn't just an affair.
It was a cover for a deeper, more profound secret. He was setting up a new family, a second chance, with a daughter. A daughter he had hidden from me for how long? Decades? The life insurance policy wasn't just to cover his debts. It was the seed money for his new life, his legacy. And Jeremy? Did Jeremy know he had a sister? Was that the final unendurable truth he had been about to confess on the porch? That his father's desperation wasn't just about money, but about providing for the secret family I was never supposed to know existed? I pulled the USB drive from the computer, my hand shaking so violently I could barely grasp it. The truth wasn't a weapon, it was a bomb, and it was now in my possession. I had gone looking for answers and found a horror beyond my darkest imaginings. My husband hadn't just wanted me dead, he had already replaced me.
The USB drive felt like a shard of ice in my hand, its coldness seeping into my palm, up my arm and straight into my soul. A daughter. He had a daughter. The word echoed in the hollowed-out chamber of my mind, a brutal, final verdict on my life. The hotel, the lies, the insurance policy, it all snapped into a new, horrifying focus. It wasn't just about erasing me. It was about building a new monument to himself with a new, younger family. I was the obsolete foundation that had to be cleared away. The fury I had felt before was a campfire compared to the nuclear winter that now settled over my heart. I didn't go home. I drove to Miriam's office. The USB drive clutched so tightly I was surprised it didn't melt. I walked in without an appointment. My face must have been a mask of such chilling finality that her receptionist simply waved me through. Miriam looked up from her desk, her sharp eyes taking in my state instantly. "Eleanor, what is it?" I placed the drive on her polished desk. It made a small, definitive click. "The rest of the story," I said, my voice eerily calm. "He has a daughter. From an affair, probably decades ago. She's pregnant. Her name is on the documents in that folder. Legacy." Miriam didn't flinch. She plugged in the drive, her movements efficient and precise. She scanned the forgeries, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she played the video. I couldn't watch it again. I turned to the window, looking down at the city, at all the people living their lives, oblivious to the earthquakes happening in the quiet houses. "This changes everything," Miriam said finally, her voice low and intent. "This isn't just a motive for murder. This is a motive for replacement. The forgeries, the insurance, the hotel. He was methodically dismantling your life to fund his second one. A jury will see that. This is premeditation of the highest order." "I don't want a jury," I said, turning to face her. The clarity was absolute, a diamond formed under immense pressure. "I don't want a public spectacle. I want to end this. My way." Miriam studied me. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we skip the long, drawn-out war. I have the nuclear codes." I gestured to the drive. "I want to force a surrender. I want you to draft the most brutal, airtight, and comprehensive divorce settlement in the history of matrimonial law. He gets nothing. Not the house, not the half of the retirement funds, nothing. He walks away with the clothes on his back and the debt he created. And in exchange, I don't take this." I tapped the drive. "To the district attorney and have him charged with conspiracy to commit murder and a litany of fraud charges that would put him in a cell for the rest of his life." A slow, grim smile spread across Miriam's face. It was the first truly genuine expression I'd seen from her. A complete capitulation. "Yes. And one more thing," I said, the final piece of my plan clicking into place. "Jeremy."
The color drained from Robert's face. He looked from the tablet to me, and for the first time I saw not hatred, but a profound, soul-crushing terror. He was afraid of losing them. The realization was the final, liberating twist of the knife. He had never loved me, not really, but he loved this illusion of a second chance, and I was holding it hostage. And Jeremy, Robert croaked, his voice broken, is no longer your concern, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, flat, the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. You used our son as an accomplice. You corrupted him. Your relationship with him is part of the price you pay. He stared at me, and I saw the last flicker of the man I had married die in his eyes. He was just a hollowed-out shell, faced with the utter ruin of both his lives. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely hold it. He signed. It was over. In less than 5 minutes. I stood up and walked out of the room without a backward glance. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a vast, silent emptiness. I had won. I had saved myself, but I was standing in the ashes of everything I had ever believed in. A week later, I sat in the same botanical garden where I had first planned my escape. The koi were still gliding, oblivious. I heard footsteps on the gravel path and didn't need to look up. Jeremy sat down beside me, his posture slumped, his face a landscape of shame. He's gone, Jeremy said quietly. He rented a cheap apartment across town. He called me. He told me everything. About her. About the baby. I said nothing. I just watched the fish. Mom, his voice broke. I am so sorry. I was weak. He was my dad, and I was scared for him. And he manipulated me. It's not an excuse. It's nothing. A tear traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung in the air between us, fragile as a soap bubble. The trust was shattered. It would never be whole again. It could never be the innocent, unconditional faith of a mother for her son. That was gone forever. A piece of my soul I would never get back. But as I looked at him, at the broken man he had become in the shadow of his father, I didn't see the accomplice. I saw the little boy who used to chase fireflies in this very garden. The fury was spent. It had done its job. It had protected me, and now it was gone, leaving behind a profound, weary sorrow. I reached out and placed my hand over his. It wasn't the warm, easy grasp of before. It was something new, something more fragile, more realistic. It was a choice. I said, "No, I can't forgive you. Not yet. But we can try to build something new from the pieces." It wasn't a happy ending. It was an ending, and that was enough. The story of Eleanor Vance, the betrayed wife, was over. The story of who I would become next was just beginning on my own terms, with my own hard-won strength, surrounded by the beautiful, broken pieces of what was left.